For Halloween this year, I thought it would be fun to pay tribute to one of my favorite sections at any Disney park, Fantasyland. As I've said in the past, this is largely because of their dark rides, which all draw from classic pretzel rides, spook houses, and ghost trains of the past. This is not meant to be an ironic video where I try to explain why Fantasyland is actually the scariest land at Disney, or something along those lines. But don't lie, most of us who went on these as kids were scared by something at least once, and that goes for some of us as adults too. These dark rides are very special, and often somewhat underrated, especially with bigger, newer, shinier attractions just a few steps away. For this world of hopes and world of fears, I want to give the dark rides their due and rank them all from least scary to scariest. This is meant to be from both a child's and adult's perspective, so it might get a little muddled at times, but I'm willing to take that risk. A few rules regarding this ranking before we proceed. This is about traditional dark rides only. We'll get a boat ride here, a trackless ride there, but only the ones that stick close to the dark ride formula. A car on a winding track going through a series of indoor displays. The Matterhorn bobsleds and Seven Dwarfs Mine Train will not be included. They have some dark ride elements, but they're mostly coasters. Similarly, the former submarine voyage at Disney World had dark ride elements, but really seemed to be its own unique thing. And no walkthrough attractions either. The dark rides must be in Fantasyland, so no Roger Rabbit. The Disneyland Winnie the Pooh won't be included either, since it's in Critter Country. Although the Haunted Mansion at Tokyo Disneyland is located in Fantasyland, I'm not including that here, since comparing it to the other dark rides is really an apple of oranges kind of thing. Finally, there are different versions of dark rides at different parks, and some of those ones have had different iterations over the years. For example, the original Mr. Toad that opened in Disneyland in 1955, the remodeled Toad seen in 1983, and the Disney World Toad are all different enough to be listed in different rankings, so that will definitely factor into the list. And now, let's get into things with what I regard as the least scary of all the dark rides. Number 18, Peter Pan's Flight, every version. While the Peter Pan rides differ slightly at different parks, with Shanghai Disney having the most elaborate one, this is probably one of the most pleasant rides in any Disney park. The only remotely scary thing about it is how long the line gets and how quickly it fills up. Even if you have a fear of heights, you're really not that high up most of the time. Although it's at the bottom of the list in terms of frights, it's still one of my top attractions in general. Number 17, The Enchanted Tale of Beauty and the Beast. This Tokyo Disney exclusive ride features some absolutely stunning animatronics, which I would love to see in person. It's also not scary in the slightest. Beauty and the Beast had some pretty dark moments, and I was pretty scared by certain scenes in the movie as a kid, particularly the wolves and the Beast himself, before Belle was able to bring out his better side. This ride either cuts or skims over anything that could potentially frighten a guest. The angry mob and Gaston are only briefly alluded to, and guests do not follow Belle into the Forbidden West Wing, a set piece begging to be in a dark ride. The pre-show is somewhat ominous, but that's it. Although the ride certainly looks impressive, I feel that there were some missed storytelling opportunities here. Number 16, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh and Pooh's Honey Hunt. Winnie the Pooh has received an attraction everywhere except Disneyland Paris, and none of them are particularly scary. As I said, I'm looking at this from the perspective of both children and adults, and I can see some kids getting a little unnerved in the Heffalumps and Woozle sequence that each ride features. Tokyo's version, while once again the most technically impressive, is the least creepy, going instead for a fun spinning section with a big band version of the song playing. I imagine most kids would be having too much fun to be scared. The versions in Florida, Hong Kong, and Shanghai have a more traditional dark ride take on the scene, and while it's a little creepy, it's still probably not going to do more than unnerve some guests, no matter what their age. Number 15, It's a Small World. I know this ride's been made fun of a lot over the years, and I'm sure some people have ironically listed it as the scariest Disney ride. I'm not innocent on this matter either. I've definitely poked some fun at it in the past. Even Disney themselves have taken some jabs. But as time's gone by, I've come to appreciate it a lot more. At the same time, I said this was from both a child's and adult's perspective, so as far as that goes, I think adults are more disturbed by this ride than kids. The countless singing children figures throughout the ride are often cited as being unintentionally creepy, and the song as maddening, and I can understand that. That's why the ride isn't at the bottom of this list, but it won't be at the top either. If you want a truly creepy take on It's a Small World, there are some foreign knockoffs that really manage to make the singing children look menacing, much more than Disney's versions were. If anything, it shows how easily the scales of cute to creepy can slide. Number 14. Journey of the Little Mermaid. This ride goes along the same lines as the Beauty and the Beast attraction, taking a movie with plenty of scare potentials for a dark ride, and then toning down all those elements. Ursula only appears once properly in the ride, as an admittedly creepy animatronic, but then never again. Unlike the movie's climax, where she grows to an incredible size and gets skewered alive by a ship, the ride has Ariel and Eric kiss, and Ursula is seen shrieking in the distance, completely glossing her over. This kind of frustrates me, since an early mock-up of the ride would have had a gigantic Ursula head emerge from the waters in front of the guests, and felt more in line with the classic dark rides that this one set out to emulate. Number 13. Alice in Wonderland, the 1983 version. Moving down the rabbit hole, we have the Alice in Wonderland dark ride exclusively at Disneyland. And to be specific, we're talking about the current version, which was remodeled back in 1983, opening in 1984. Alice is a weird movie, and the ride reflects that, while also not being completely deranged. There's some off-putting scenery, especially in the Tulgey Wood section, but there's still a sense of fun and whimsy overriding most of the potentially scary scenes. I do remember when I was younger seeing a photo of the bellowing Queen of Hearts figure, and feeling apprehensive of the idea of going on the ride. I didn't get a chance to actually visit Disneyland until somewhat recently. Having now ridden Alice, I don't think the Queen would have scared me that much, since there are so many crazy fun things happening throughout the experience that it's really hard to focus on one prop, scary or not. Number 12. Snow White's Enchanted Wish. When someone says scary rides in Fantasyland, anyone who's ever been on a version of Snow White's Adventures, or is even aware of that ride, will probably think of that one first. And the first and least scary of those adventures we'll be seeing on this list is the newest version of Disneyland, Snow White's Enchanted Wish. I remember feeling really mixed about the news that they're going to soften Snow White. On one hand, I'm sure countless generations have been scarred by this attraction. Kids go in expecting Snow White, and even in versions where she's present, it's still predominantly the witch's ride. This ride is finally what so many kids had assumed it was. On the other hand, it's weird that Snow White is no longer the de facto scary dark ride, at least as far as the United States is concerned. And in fairness, they didn't completely omit the witch. When I heard they were changing the ride, I had hoped that my two favorite parts remain: the Queen gazing out the window at park guests, and her turning around to reveal the witch. Both of those stayed, so I really shouldn't complain. Yes, the skeletons in the dungeon that moaned at guests to turn back are now just a bunch of lab equipment. Yes, several of the witch figures have been removed, and yes, the climactic scene on the cliff looks really cluttered, but there are still some scary adventures to be had inside the Enchanted Wish. Number 11. Snow White's Scary Adventures, the 1994 Walt Disney World version. This ride, doing what Enchanted Wish would arguably pull off better, tried to balance the scary and friendly elements of the story. Figures of Snow White and the dwarves appeared more frequently than in previous versions, for one thing, and there was a proper happy ending. There's still a lot of emphasis on the witch, with the ride starting in her castle instead of leading up to it like in the Disneyland versions. I have a feeling, though, that even by the ride's midway point, where guests would enter the dwarves' cottage to see them happily dancing, that a lot of kids were already in tears. Number 10, Snow White's Scary Adventures, the Disneyland Paris version, and number 9, Snow White's Scary Adventures, the 1983 Disneyland version. And just after that, we have essentially a tie between the 83 version of Snow White and the Disneyland Paris version. The rides are almost identical, with the biggest difference being that Paris also has a happy ending scene, while the Disneyland version at the time didn't have space for it. For that reason, I'd say Paris is the less scary version. Unlike the 1994 Disney World version, these ones start in the dwarf's cottage and gradually become darker, easing guests into the scary atmosphere more. But in the case of Disneyland, that was the only time they got to see Snow White, thanks to a lack of a truly happy ending scene, and the ride feels kind of cold as a result. One of my favorite frights is near the end, where after escaping the castle and journeying through the haunted forest, the guests are relieved to see that they're returning to the dwarf's cottage. Then the door swings open to reveal the witch, holding out her apple. Like many of the other dark ride effects, it's simple, but it works so well. Number 8. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, the 1955 Disneyland version. Moving away from Snow White for a bit, we're heading into Toad Hall, and looking at the beloved Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. There have been 3 core versions of this ride, and while the original version at Disneyland's opening day was not the most frightening, it still packed a punch. The ride only lasted roughly 90 seconds, but sent guests careening through the countryside and streets of London before colliding head-on with a train and infamously winding up in hell. It seems like a lot to take in such a short time today, and with the even shorter length in its original state, it really must have made riders' heads spin. Aside from a few cops, a railway worker, and some devils, the original ride didn't really feature any characters inside, and I imagine it must have felt like a rather lonely experience. But I suppose when guests are trying to use their steering wheel to no avail to try to avoid oncoming traffic, the lack of plywood bystanders probably wouldn't bother them too much. Number 7, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, the Walt Disney World version. Mr. Toad's Wildest ride was at Disney World, where it had 2 separate tracks with 2 significantly different experiences, depending on which line guests got in. Although the presence of many cartoony people throughout the attraction might have been amusing, I can also imagine some riders, particularly kids, trying even harder to turn their car away from the frightened pedestrians. I think that might have made the essentially useless steering wheels on the cars even more stressful. This ride also featured a jump scare, something always effective. Upon entering Hell, one of the final things guests would see was a large green Satan popping out from behind a rock. You know, if getting hit by a train and winding up in hell wasn't scary enough. Number 6, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, the 1983 Disneyland version. Finishing our Toad trilogy is the current Disneyland version, the only one still operating today. While the Disney World version was arguably the best, the Disneyland one still has enough zaniness to deliver a wild ride of its own. I'm ranking this as the scariest one of the 3 due to mostly cosmetic reasons. A lot of the people you menaced in the Disney World version had a frightened, silly, innocent look to them. The ones in the Disneyland ride look a lot angrier and a little less easy on the eyes. Also, although their hell scene lacks the jump scare, the demonic prosecutor who emerges to welcome you is pretty scary in his own right. Number 5, Pinocchio's Daring Journey. Located in Disneyland, Tokyo, and Paris, are similar enough to count as one entry here. Just like the movie it's based on, the Daring Journey is bookended by a few happy moments, but it's mostly one frightening encounter after another. The ride's tone is immediately set upon entering. After seeing Pinocchio happily dancing on stage for about 10 seconds, the very next scene shows him trapped in a cage, with the riders entering their own oversized cage a moment later. The following Pleasure Island scene, even in the jovial parts, has an underlying sinister feeling, which is no surprise to anyone who knows the story. The creepy-looking donkey looking down from the entry gate is a nice touch. As I said in a previous video, I think the room full of caged, crying donkeys is one of the saddest moments in any Disney attraction. Even though a decent portion of the ride's ending is dedicated to Geppetto's house, with all the fun toys and clocks, it's the darker moments that will linger with you as you depart. Number 4, Snow White's Adventures, the Tokyo Disneyland version. The Tokyo Snow White takes a lot of cues from the various American versions of the attraction, mixing them all into a package that is generally on the scarier side. The ride opens the same way as the Florida version, putting guests face to face with the witch and then into the haunted forest. This forest gets extra points for using the famous banshee wail sound effect from Darby O'Gill and the Little People. The finale of the ride is notable as well. Like the Disneyland version of Scary Adventures, before its Enchanted Wish makeover, it ends with the witch about to crush the 7 dwarves, and possibly the riders, with a boulder. The Disneyland version at least showed her getting struck by lightning, and tacked on a storybook mural afterwards, but this version does neither. It doesn't say that the witch succeeded in killing the dwarves, but it also doesn't say she didn't. Number 3, Alice in Wonderland, the 1958 version. One thing I love about the early dark rides is that they didn't often follow the linear plot of the movies they were based on, but rather just put riders in the environment and kind of just did their own things. This is definitely evident with the original Disneyland version of Alice in Wonderland. Of course, Alice doesn't have much of a plot in the first place, but they still took some creative liberties with this one, the biggest being that most of the ride is from the point of view of a shrunken Alice. She's even tiny in scenes in the ride where she was normal-sized in the film, like the Tulgey Woods and the Mad Tea Party. In true vintage dark ride fashion, there was a lot of emphasis on weird lighting, loud noises, and jump scares. The White Rabbit blasted his horn at you, the Cheshire Cat cackled down at you, a monstrous dandelion would lunge at you, glowing eyes would peer out from the woods, and the giant heads of the Mad Hatter and March Hare would bellow at you to move down along their table. No wonder Alice wanted to wake up so badly. Number 2, Snow White and Her Adventures, the 1955 Disneyland version. The original Snow White ride from Disneyland's opening day really set the bar for scary Disney attractions. Sometimes it's the cruder set pieces and characters that are more frightening than the shiny polished ones. I'm not trying to knock the work of any of the Imagineers or cast members, especially since they had a tight deadline to meet. And in this case, it works very well for the ride's atmosphere, since everything seemed just a little bit off. Even the dwarf figures seen inside the ride didn't seem quite right. Like many of the other Disneyland rides, this one focused mostly on the witch. The first third of the ride took place in the dwarves' diamond mines, but after that, it was the castle and the forest, with the witch appearing multiple times with her famous apple. This witch, from the few pictures that we have of her, might have been the scariest one, looking more like a Halloween prop than her animated counterpart. There was also a skeleton in her dungeon that appeared to lunge at guests, with a chattering skull. Like in Tokyo, the ride ended with the guests passing under the witch trying to pry a boulder loose. The dwarves were not present in this scene, so it was clear that the guests themselves were the witch's targets. They passed through a dark tunnel after that before exiting the ride, with the witch's scream being heard, the same one she makes in the movie when she falls. At least that implied that the guests made it out alive, unlike in Mr. Toad Next Door. Number 1. Snow White's Adventures, the 1971 Walt Disney World version. I'm sure most people clicking this video knew that one of the many Snow Whites would have made the number 1 scariest spot. The version that opened with Disney World took everything that made the original Disneyland version scary and ran with it. The witch figure, while looking more like she does in the movie, still looks off-model enough to be creepier than usual. This was the first version of the attraction to feature the classic moment when the queen turns around to face guests as the witch. I think the best executed jump scare was in the dwarves' cottage. The dwarves made their one and only appearance there, and guests would most likely be so happy to see some friendly faces that they would crane their necks to get a better look at them. Cue the witch popping out in the window in front of the riders to give them yet another shock. And when the ride wasn't being overtly scary, it was trying to make the riders paranoid. Although the ride does have some barely audible, somewhat minimalistic music heard in the Queen's throne room and the diamond mine, most of the ride is underscored only by the ever-present cackling of the witch. She really does seem to be around every corner in this version, and even when she wasn't present, her hideous laughter is a nice reminder that she was waiting for you further in the darkness. Even the lighter parts of the ride were creepy. The waiting area, while absolutely beautiful, had the echoing voice of Snow White heard singing, but she was nowhere to be seen. Inside the dwarf's cottage, their normally charming furniture looked particularly creepy under the dark lighting, and the dwarves themselves were frightened by a scary shadow coming from their bedroom. If you've seen the movie, you know it's Snow White's shadow, but having the princess be just out of sight from the guests again made it seem like the ride was actively taunting them. And then, of course, there's that ending. In this version, the witch chased guests into the diamond mine. The final scene had her toppling a huge gem onto them and killing them. There was no ambiguity here. The ride made guests certain that the witch succeeded in crushing them to death, complete with a horrifying echo effect added to her cackles. Unlike the devils in Mr. Toad giving the wild ride an appropriately wacky punchline, this ending wasn't nearly as funny, but it more than earned this attraction the top spot as the scariest Fantasyland dark ride of all time. As always with these lists, I'd like to hear your own thoughts on which dark ride you found the scariest. Happy Halloween, everyone!